Good morning or good afternoon or evening, depending on your time zone. I'm Brian Katoulis. I'm the Vice President of Policy at the Middle East Institute. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our discussion on how protests in Iran shape an uncertain future. Before I introduce our panelists in the discussion, I just wanted to give a brief introduction to the Middle East Institute and what we do and what our mission is to set the context for our discussion this morning. Middle East Institute, or MEI, is the oldest Washington, D.C. based think tank focused on the Middle East. We were founded 76 years ago. Our mission is to increase the knowledge of the Middle East among citizens of the United States, and also to foster a deeper understanding between Americans and people of the region. We're a nonpartisan think tank and a .edu. So our first mission is education. We have an excellent library, which we just celebrated the reopening of at our facilities here in the DuPont Circle area. On that mission of education, we also offer classes for those of you who are interested in honing your language skills in Persian, Arabic, Hebrew, Turkish, and so forth. We also have a cultural wing, which has arts and music and celebration. 2 weeks from tonight at our headquarters here in Washington, D.C., we have a unique event called Yalla Laugh, which is a comedy show with comedians from the region and what will be a fun night out. But today and this morning, what we're going to talk about, unfortunately, isn't very much close to comedy at all, and it's very serious and quite sad, but hopefully has a hopeful end to the story at some point. And it's a focused discussion mostly on the people of Iran and what's going on right now, and trying to understand and tease out what this means. And I think it's important for us here in Washington, and we have in this town multiple think tanks and people doing wonderful work on the Middle East and Iran as well. But quite often, what's missing from discussions on Iran are the people of Iran and the millions of people who have aspirations. And unfortunately, sometimes in our own debates from different sides of the spectrum here in Washington and US, the people of Iran are either missing from that discussion, or they're used as props for different sort of policy advocacy or different agendas. We're going to try to avoid that here today and try to deepen our understanding collectively of what just exactly has been going on over the last couple of weeks, connect it to previous episodes with what the Iranian people are facing, and open up the discussion first with the four of us, and then include you. So there is a function here, if you're tuning in live, to ask some questions in the Q&A. So please go ahead and do that. We'll have some time towards the end of the discussion. Let me introduce the panel, and then I'll kick it off with a couple of questions to that panel. Speaking first will be Holly Dagras, who is a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. You can check her out on Twitter, where she has a font of information and real-time sort of analysis of what's going on the ground. And I found it very useful over the last couple of weeks to track her perspective and what she's watching there. Secondly, we'll hear from Mohsen Safsagara, who's we're fortunate to have as an affiliated scholar on our Iran program. Mohsen, if you look at his biography, has a deep connection with Iran and was involved, including in the 1975, 79 shifts. But I met with him recently and just learned a lot about the deep intellectual history of Iran and the different currents that have existed going back decades there. And he's just a font of knowledge about the current regime, but also what it's rooted in and what came before it. And last but not least, my friend and colleague, Alex Vatanka, who runs our Iran program here at the Middle East Institute. And what I'll do is I'll ask questions to each of them, and then we'll have a bit of a conversation for the first 30, 40 minutes or so, and then open it up to some of the questions that some of you are fielding in through the chat function, through the Q&A. So first, Holly, why don't we just start with the basics and describe for us what's going on now in the streets of Iran? How similar is this to past episodes that we've seen in recent years and before? And what's really different? I think that's the central question. From your perspective, what's really different about this current moment?
Well, Brian, thank you so much for having me. It's been quite a heavy couple of weeks for someone of Iranian heritage that spent their formative years in Iran. I think one of the things that has been extraordinary is the international attention this has gotten. We haven't seen this kind of international attention since the 2009 post-election protests known as the Green Movement. And just to give you a sense of how much attention it's gotten, there's been over 150 million tweets about hashtag Masa Amini. And we've seen celebrities, singers, everyone from singers like Dua Lipa to supermodel Bella Hadid. I just saw Jennifer Aniston posting a TikTok from a girl in Iran. And that's just to give you a sense of how much it's captivated the world that everyone's focusing on it. Now, we're now day 13 of these protests, and they've spread to all 31 of Iran's provinces. It's still ongoing. Whether it's waning or not, it's unclear because of the snail-like pace of the internet. And we've had instances where there's been a near total shutdown of the internet. The latest from a Norway-based human rights organization is that they've had at least 83 killed and thousands arrested. Those numbers are certain to rise. Since the protests have begun, we've seen security forces arrest prominent activists, including Majid Tabakoli and Hossein Ronaghi, at least 28 journalists, including Niloufar Hamidi, who actually was the first person to report on Masa Jina Amini's death, and even Iranian celebrities. I think, yes, this is a women's movement, but more importantly, it's a youth-led one. We've seen Iranian women demanding life and liberty. They've been removing their headscarves, burning their headscarves, and even cutting their hair. But this really isn't just about mandatory hijab. It's about the status quo. Protesters, through their words, have been vocalizing that they no longer want an Islamic Republic. They've been saying things like, I will fight, I will die, I will take back Iran, death to Khamenei, this year is bloody, Sayyid Ali Khamenei will be overthrown. But I think what's key about these protests is that it's led by Iranian Gen Z, or as we call them, Zoomers. So these Zoomers are angry and frustrated at the status quo, and they're certainly not afraid to express that sentiment, whether it's online or in the streets. And we've seen over recent years that they're willing to push beyond the red lines of the Islamic Republic. Iranian Gen Z has grown up with satellite dishes and the internet, and they access the internet and social media through circumvention tools like VPNs. 35% of the world's most popular websites are blocked by the Islamic Republic. And so they have to go through insurmountable hurdles just to get online and show us, the people in the world, what's happening in their country. This is a generation that's grown up watching the 2009 post-election protests, the Green Movement. They've also seen what happened during the November 2019 protests, in which security forces killed and arrested thousands. They've grown up isolated from the world, and they're hopeless. And now that they've come of age, they're asking for change. They also have little in common with the geriatric leadership of the Islamic Republic. They actually make fun of them through memes and deep fakes. One perfect example of this is that 95-year-old Ayatollah Ahmad Janati, the chairman of the influential Guardian Council, which is a vetting body, they take a lot of time focusing on him, and they call him a dinosaur and prehistoric. So that should give you a sense of how they feel about the clerical establishment. But thanks to information and communications technology, this generation sees how the rest of the world lives and what they're missing out on. And this was best encompassed by a song by Iran-based singer Shervin Hajipour. His viral song, Be Khatere, or For the Sake of, was composed of tweets about why people were taking the streets, for everything for the quote unquote, for the shame of having no money, for the fear of kissing a lover on the street, for freedom. It's as simple as that. This song arguably has become the anthem of these protests and has been viewed over 40 million times in less than 48 hours. And it's clearly been a threat to the Islamic Republic, because just yesterday we heard of the news of Shervin Hajipour's arrest. So even if these protests end, this isn't over. A 22-year-old protester penned in an open letter pleading to the world that the voices of the people of Iran be heard. And she wrote, I quote, "This time we will not be silenced by the government's bullets. For every fallen, many rise in the name of freedom." So this is a generation of Iranians that are protesting for the first time, but they're also a force to be reckoned with, and they should not be underestimated. And I'll just leave you with some commentary that I just picked up from Nasrin Sotoudeh, who just did an interview with Time. She's one of Iran's leading women's rights defenders, and she's currently on furlough from prison. She described these protests as a quote unquote revolution. And I'm going to read this one quote and take it from there, let you take it from there. "This is a totalitarian system whose presence people fear in their blood and in their flesh on a daily basis. What is increasingly clear is that there is a clear demand for change in the regime. What the people want is regime change and no return to the past. What we can see from the current protests and strikes that are now being initiated is a very real possibility of regime change." And that was from Nasrin Sotoudeh in Iran.
Great, Holly. That's an excellent starting point and exactly where we wanted to begin, which is where the people are in Iran and what's likely to happen next. We'll have some follow-up questions from you, but I wanted to turn to Muhsin, jumping off of that, to tell us what you think these protests mean for the ruling authorities, for the regime in Iran, when you see how they're reacting to it. I know it's very hard. I saw this episode earlier this month where there were rumors that the Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei, was very, very ill, and rumors that he might pass away soon. And there's been episodes of different sort of rumors and misinformation and things like this. And I know it's extremely hard for anyone, any of us from the outside, to really truly understand what's going on inside of the regime. When you see what's happening in the streets, and then importantly, how the regime is reacting now, measured up against similar episodes to this, does it tell you anything different about the cohesiveness of the regime, the power struggles and the positioning that go on in any regime like this? What's your picture of what's going on inside of the halls of power in Tehran?
Thank you, Brian, for having me. First of all, I have to say that I agree with Nasrin Sotoudeh. Many people say that this is not a protest, this is not a riot, this is a revolution. And I am from a generation that the young generation tell to us that you should join two revolutions together. The first one was a mistake. This one is the correct one for life, liberty, and equal rights for women. This is the positive slogan of this revolution, and the negative slogan is death to Khamenei, death to this regime, and this regime should be toppled down. In a brief, I have to say that more than 306 cities all around Iran, in all 31 provinces of Iran, have been in turmoil during last 2 weeks. In more than 1,800 points, as the suppression machine says that it is red points, including plus Tehran and 5 over millions big cities of Iran. What is inside regime? The cultural pillar of the regime, I mean, unquote, the pro-regime celebrities defected just in first 10 days. Many of the actors, many of the sportsmen, and who were called as the pro-regime people, just in first 10 days, they joined the people. Now and
this never happened before, something like this?
Never happened before, yeah. As the young generation say that they are the cultural generals of the regime, Sardaran Farhangi, and they defected. They joined the people. They announced that we are with the people. Now this regime has only suppression machine. Suppression machine is, consists of Basij, Revolutionary Guard, police. army, the Atesh, the military, classic military of Iran is out of politics. People, call them that protect us, but they are still out of the scene, although there are turmoils inside that. But Revolutionary Guard is now in command with intelligence service of Iran, intelligence of Revolutionary Guard, and Ministry of Intelligence, these two big agencies, and Basij and police. Basij, they expected 500,000 Basijis, paramilitia people, bring them to the streets. So far, they have succeeded 1/5 of that. Only 100,000 they have succeeded to bring. Why? Because people actually talk to them in every neighborhood, know them, put pressure on their family, and they don't come to the streets to confront the people. Police, they have a problem. Sick lift is very common right now in police forces. And so far, they have arrested 641 members of Revolutionary Guard and police because they have disobedience to the orders to confront the people. The death toll, as you see, is almost low, more than 80, at most 100. Why? Don't think that Khamenei, the leader, didn't order them to kill. The order is shoot to kill the leaders, like November 2019. But they don't do that. Easily they say that we see our relatives on the other side. And more important, especially in our culture in Middle East, when women or girls are on the other side, it's difficult to confront them, to beat them. And they have brought 900 members of Hashd Shabi who were under training in Tehran. I got it yesterday, to join the forces because they are in short of the forces. And we have said to the people that they are now the foreigners who has entered the battle between Iranians. So if people find them, I don't know what they will do with them. Anyway, so far they have arrested 187 clerics from mosques from all around the country because they opposed what the regime is doing. I mean, a part of the clerics are not with them. Anyway, the main crisis inside the regime is lack of shortage of, suppression forces, the guerrilla tactics in civil resistance, that the protest, the people who protest, they are everywhere in every neighborhood, so they can't concentrate their forces. They have been trained to attack to a mob, not different groups everywhere. So they have a problem with that. Right now that we are talking, today morning, I got, I collect news from everywhere with my colleagues. Right now that we are talking, more than 61 cities of Iran are in turmoil. And there are protests. 97 universities are on a strike. Today is holiday. Tomorrow, the young people invited the people go to the universities at 2:00 in the afternoon to protect university students who will protest inside the universities. Anyway, the leader, who is the chief commander, he has deep depression. I didn't find any news. I tried to find any news about the New York Times report, his surgery, but I don't know if he has any medical problem, but he has psychic problem. He can't sleep at night. He can't sleep at night. He's angry. He's nervous. And today that we are talking, it's supposed that they have transferred him from his place at the heart of Tehran in Pastor Avenue to a place outside Iran, outside Tehran. It's about 40 kilometers, George Road, behind the dam over there. They have made a secret place for him. Anyway, They are bringing him back to Pastor. Tonight, he has a proper meeting with top commanders because amongst the 11 top commanders of Revolutionary Guard police and the intelligence, they got problem. They have clash between each others, and they blame each other. So tonight, the leader, although he's sick, they bring him to Pastor to have a meeting with them, and maybe he can solve the problem. There are many more in this regard, but I stop here. Thank you.
So Muslim, just real quick. So would you say that what's going on inside of the regime is also unprecedented, that you've not seen this before? Yes or no? Yes. Yeah, this is something.
No. I have never seen like that. For instance, in Green Movement, I was involved very much, or in November 2019, just in 4 days, they killed more than 236 people. Reuters counted 1,500. But this time, although they have ordered the same stage, they have procedure for that. They have evaluated this uprising the same as November 2019, but they don't kill. They have a problem. And I have never seen such a chaos inside the regime. They have started to arrest everybody. And they do big mistakes. For instance, they arrest the famous football players that are very popular in Iran. Then most of the football players, soccer, they support him. And so many more celebrities join them. Or they started to, for instance, the famous actress, Fatemeh Motammed Arya, that was the famous, somehow pro-regime. Yesterday, she took her scarf as well. And now they have treated her and the others, and it makes the situation worse because the other celebrities support them. I have never seen like that, such a chaos inside the regime.
Great. Thank you for those insights, Mohsen, and I'll circle back to you in a bit with some more questions to follow up in the conversation. Alex, turning to you, and it strikes me, here we are in America, I think all of us, and Florida was just hit with a pretty strong hurricane, and South Carolina is about to. And I think the type of analysis we're trying to do on Iran right now is sort of like in the midst of a hurricane and trying to assess what will really be left standing, and then what will get knocked down, and then how do you rebuild? So we're in the middle of sort of the hurricane, if you will, and it's hard to assess because of the dynamic situation. But could you draw these different strands together? Holly started with comments on the people and the protests. Mohsen gave us some insight on how he sees the regime responding and what's going on inside there. Can you paint a picture for us overall about the internal political dynamics? You and I have talked quite a lot about the post-Khamenei period that's about to come in Iran, and we have a paper coming out next month talking about U.S. policy. But what does this current moment tell us about what will be an inevitable leadership transition, and how do you see the current situation and what it leads to?
Thank you, Brian. I mean, look, Holly and Mohsen did a fantastic job telling us what's going on and what has been happening in the last almost 2 weeks. And as you said, sitting at the Middle East Institute, we are an educational institution, not an advocacy organization. But to be honest, it's really hard for any human being with a heart and a sense of right and wrong not to want to side with the protesters, because what I've been seeing the last 2 weeks daily, it really breaks your heart. This is the young generation of Iran that's literally being, massacred by a regime that sees its own citizens to be in the way of their ideology. So that's the big story. I mean, the big story of the day is, and for our audience, Ali Khamenei, the Iranian supreme leader, has been there since June of 1989. He's had multiple opportunities to change policies domestically, what Iran does in the region, what it does in terms of issues that we care about a lot, US-Iran relations. Over 30 years, he's had opportunities, and it's not like he had to be reminded. How many rounds of protest have we seen? This is just the latest that we're going through. So I think what we have here is really essentially about one man and the pact he made back in 1989 with the generals and the Revolutionary Guards. These two powers in Tehran, the office of the Supreme Leader, meaning Ali Khamenei, and the Revolutionary Guards, decided back then that they want to have as much power as they can get their hands on and do exactly as they wish in Iran and in the region. And to be honest, for a long time, they got away with it. But what you're seeing now is a new generation. And you know, this is a generation that has nothing to do with the revolution of 1979. These people are nostalgic for the days of the Shah. They know the Shah through their parents or grandparents or what they can pick up in terms of history books. What they know is what they have lived under Khamenei and this Islamic Republic is something they don't want. And it really takes a lot for someone to come on the street and start confronting the security forces in a state like the Islamic Republic. So you have to give it to them. They're brave. And if you listen to protesters that, for example, were in the streets in 2009, they will tell you the folks who are in the streets today in Iran, they are much braver than them. And they have a lot less to lose. And that's the stories of the Islamic Republic. It has pushed the population, the country, to a point where so many people have nothing left to lose. What else do they have? You know, for a long time, generations of Iranians would get up and leave the country. They will simply emigrate. A lot of them these days can't even afford that anymore. Or for personal reasons, they're saying, you know what, I'll stay back and fight for my country. That's the story. And let me just say this, Brian, and I want to stop because I really want to have this conversation for all of us. Khamenei's biggest recent gamble, I think, I'd love to hear what Holly and Mohsen have to say about this, is he's worried about the succession process. He's 83. We don't know how his health is. He's 83, and that in itself tells us quite a bit. He really micromanaged, engineered the election of someone that there's no way Ibrahim Raisi would be president of Iran today. Not that the presidency really matters, it's a symbolic office in this system, but Khamenei decided to have Raisi there, and basically that was the biggest, excuse me, expression, middle finger to the Iranian people, who for a long time actually wanted to play this game of reformists versus hardliners, and they sometimes would take part in elections. Khamenei said, let's stop the pretending. I'm the boss, and this guy, Raisi, will be my puppet president. And you have seen people inside the regime since the election of 2021 saying, we are really pushing our luck here. So I think the disrespect and insulting the Iranian public, including the youth that have nothing left to lose, got to a point where we're facing what we're seeing. So, you know, I don't know what's going to happen. I have to be humble. I've done Iran as an analyst for 22 years. I've seen rounds of protests. I think the human being in me wants to see a different Iran. The analyst in me wants to be skeptical and say, I don't really know. I know there are 16 Iranian intelligence services who have been paid for years to come out and kill and crack down their own citizens. But I also know, as Mohsen said, those are also, after all, human beings. And not everybody in the Iranian regime has blood on their hands. And this is a pivotal moment for them. Where do they want to go? Do they want to stay with this regime, who I think is days are essentially numbered, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next month, but they are disconnected from the Iranian public. Anyway, let me stop here. It's certainly the most interesting set of political developments we've seen in Iran for a very long time.
Great. Thank you, Alex. And I want to turn back first to Holly, then to Mohsen, on the question that you posed, and maybe add a bit of a little flourish and connection to something that may be imprecise that I see, a connection or an analogy. But yesterday at MEI, we hosted a panel on Palestine and the transition to come there as well. And you can find that on our website at mei.edu. And the imprecise parallel that I see there is that you have an aging leadership in Ramallah. And then you also have people, a new generation that simply is just sick and tired of the status quo, right? And you have an effort by the leaders in Palestine to maintain their power and execute some sort of transition in a bubble away from the streets and what the people actually want, especially the young people. It's imprecise, but it's similar to some dynamics we saw more than a decade ago in many of the Arab countries, where there was attempts at trying to expand freedom and democracy. Holly, you've done a lot of work, and you mentioned it briefly in your comments about Gen Z and some of the generational divisions. How do you see their thinking? I mean, clearly they're in an oppositional mode. They don't like what they see. They want something different. Do you see any different strands in that generation in terms of what they'd like to produce, what they'd like to see in terms of a future Iran? What are the more textured sort of different groupings, whether it's ideological or political, or right now is it just simply they're unified in their opposition to the regime and its policies and how they treat women and a number of other things? Where do you see that all going? And then Mohsen, after Holly speaks, you and I had this discussion with Alex several months ago about sort of the different deep intellectual tradition and political traditions inside of Iran. So what I want to take is sort of your collective, the three of you, your assessment of what's going on right now, and do a little bit of crystal ball gazing based on what we know of sort of the next generation in the streets, but then also what, Mohsen, you've looked at for decades about the different strands of political thinking and what might come after this. Holly.
Thank you, Brian. That's a loaded question. I will start by saying I think that the Islamic Republic has recognized for some time now that they're struggling to capture the interests of the youth. Talking about Raisi, during the 2017 Iranian presidential election, they actually recruited an underground rapper by the name of Amir Tatalu to have a photo op with Raisi. And it's a really awkward photo if you look it up. The guy's tatted up, got tattoo sleeves, and Raisi sitting really awkwardly next to him, clearly uncomfortable by the sight of him. Amir Tatalu is now living in exile in Turkey and is tatted up from head to toe, and he can't go back to Iran because he rolled up a joint and smoked it in Tbilisi, Georgia at a concert. So that should kind of give you the sense of what kind of person or background Amir Tatalu comes from. Anyways, the point being that they've struggled with this for some time. We've also seen recently, and maybe you've been aware of this song, Salam Farmande, or Salute Commander, and it's technically targeted at Gen Alpha, which is the generation after Gen Z, and it's a song that's essentially pledging allegiance to the supreme leader. It makes mention of Qasem Soleimani, and it also it talks about the occulted Shia saint or Imam Mahdi. And they've been forcing kids to learn this song, sing this song. We've seen youth choirs sing it at football stadiums. There was actually a viral video recently where the people in the stands were actually booing. And so this has been their struggle for some time, trying to get the attention of this youth, and they've actually recognized this. They recognize you if you actually read online in some of these IRGC affiliated magazines and outlets. They've been discussing this for some time, that these kids are kind of hard to deal with. Like, they have the internet, and they've really struggled with this for some time. And when looking at who are at the forefront of these protests, these youths in the street, I think they're right now united by their basic needs and wants of freedom. At the end of the day, these are kids under 25. What they read is what they read at school, and also what they read on the internet. They're very tech savvy. They're reading everything we're doing, everything we're saying. They're watching how Western governments are. Yes, they've been vocal, but they're merely tweets, and they're upset by that. They want more. They're literally posting videos of themselves. Some of these girls, like this TikTok video I saw, she's not with hijab, and she's pleading for the world to help Iran. And this could get her jailed and for a very long time. And she's willing to do this because she's so desperate. Out of desperation, she's pleading for the international community to do more. And they recognize this, and they won't forget. They're already angry and fed up. But if they see that there's inaction, whatever that might be, they're going to be even more angry with the international community for sitting on the sidelines and watching this unfold and not doing anything about it.
Great, Holly, thanks. And Mohsen, I sort of already asked you the question, but can you build on what Holly just said, and tell us what's your best prediction of the different strands that exist there, both in the streets and then maybe those inside of the regime who are who really are not happy with the way the Supreme Leader or others have responded here. What's your best prediction of what might come? Consider the hypothetical that this is a different moment and it produces something different. What comes after this? Is this something that is more open and responsive to the people of Iran? And again, I'm asking for your analysis, not your hope. I like Alex's dichotomy between, as a human being, you want people to just be basically free and you're with them. But I want you to be an analyst here, a cold sort of calculating analyst. What's your best prediction of what might come, given what's not only in the streets, but then the political thinkers and the different movements that exist both within the regime and then outside of it?
First of all, let me tell you a joke that the young generation say about that salute to commander. They say that very soon Khamenei should say, we should say to him goodbye, the commander, and he should say salute to real commander, who is Putin. Vladimir Putin, because Iranians believe that Putin dictates to Khamenei whatever he does in Iran. Anyway, I think that as this young generation shouts that we want life, we want liberty, we want equal rights, we want, actually in one word, modernity and democracy. The future of Iran definitely will be a secular democracy. Maybe Iran is the only country in that region that if you have a free election, secular democratic forces will win the election by more than 90%. Because they have tested the theology that now is just a kleptocracy. What maybe we will have, it's very difficult to forecast what will happen during next weeks or next month. But this revolution that started, I think that is beginning of the end. It's the beginning of the end of 44 years of Islamic Republic of Iran that started as a totalitarian regime. And now it's just a kleptocracy and terrorist regime all around the world. From Kabul to Caracas, they have the biggest, the network of terrorism and smugglers. So I think that if people of Iran succeed, besides to protest, go for strikes that have been invited to that, go for other tactics of civil resistance, boycotting, or joining together in civil resistance actions, the chance of transferring to a democracy will be increased. Otherwise, maybe we will have a period of failed state in Iran. And then after that, after a period of military dictatorship, then again we will be toward the democracy. It's hard to say, it's a big forecast, but I think that later soon, this regime will be toppled down by the people because they don't want it. And how it will be the next step, it depends on that how the people bring down this regime. If they succeed on civil resistance to bring them down, maybe easily the country will be transferred to a secular democracy, or not by riots, clash, and fighting. Maybe for a while we will have a crisis, a failed state status in Iran, and definitely after that we will have a military rulers. Then after that again will be democracy. Anyway, there will not be any Islamists in at the top. I mean, this vicious circle in Middle East that Islamists go up, then when you take the power from them, the military dictators go up. I think that in Iran it will not happen because they have tested the Islamists at the top, and the future will be either one: a military dictatorship toward modern world, or a secular democracy based on the will of the people. By the way, it depends on the events that is going to happen during next month or maybe weeks or years. I don't know.
Yeah, and that's, I think, the joke prediction is difficult, especially about the future, is certainly apropos here with Iran. And thanks for that analysis. I think one interesting thing we in the think tank community, not just us here, but others that are studying this, might take some time to paint out what may be some of these scenarios, because just in your remarks right there, Mohsen, you pointed out many different contingencies and different pathways. You have a certain vision of where it ultimately may land, but that's an interesting exercise in this moment of turmoil and uncertainty to do. I want to turn to Alex, and I promised that I would start to weave in some of the questions from the audience, and there's some really terrific ones in the chat. And thanks to our audience actually for tuning in live, and for those of you following it afterwards, this will be online, and maybe some of you are watching later. We've kept the focus on the people of Iran, and I'm glad we've done that. And we've done it in a way that offers, I think, more texture that goes beyond the headlines of the mullahs and the leaders. And we need to do more of that in this town to talk about the people of Iran. Alex, I want to turn to widen the aperture a little bit, and something that I know you've done a lot of work on. And for those of you in the audience, if you've not read Alex's work, in particular his last book, The Battle of the Ayatollahs in Iran, published last year, it's terrific. You're working on another book about Iran's foreign policy to the region and the Arab world. And that's where I wanted to take the question, which comes in from the outside, is what's your best estimate? I know it's early days, and you've seen previous episodes where there's been turmoil and protests. What do you think this means for how Iran's leaders might decide what it does in the region? And it certainly has an aggressive approach that tries to shape the region through Iraq to Lebanon and Yemen and other places. And I know it's hard, where it's all contingent, but what's your best guess of whether this leads to a pullback from Iran in the region? Will it be more aggressive? Maybe we don't know the exact answer to that question, but what's your analysis on this general, what to expect of what Iran may do in the region in the coming months, given its internal turmoil?
I mean, Brian, look, I guess the answer to that question, if you want to get it right, if you are an Iranian, the ruling elite in Tehran, be it Khamenei, the Revolutionary Guards, or somebody else, if you want to have a foreign policy that is better liked, for lack of a better word, you need to do things differently. What Ayatollah Khamenei and the Revolutionary Guards, just the last 10 years, have done is to focus so much on the region. And by focusing so much in investing what I would call high-risk strategies in places like Syria, Iraq, Yemen, what they have done is spend Iranian blood and treasure and forgotten about their homeland. And what you're seeing in those chants and the anger you see among the protesters partly is reflecting this sort of dismay and anger about what they have done in the name of Iran in the region. And what do they actually have to show for it? Now I know there's a debate. Iran is the winner in the region, Iran is the loser in the region, but I look at it in terms of, so let's just say, for the sake of argument, that some folks have in recent years made the argument that Iran today controls 4 Arab capitals: Beirut, Damascus, Baghdad, and Sana'a. Let's say that's true. What does that actually do for Iranian national interest in terms of the well-being of the Iranian people? Right? Never mind geopolitical power projection, that's all good. What has it actually done for your average Iranian in Iran today? And by the way, this is not a criticism you can level only at the door of the point at the Islamic Republic. You could say that about the United States foreign policy at times and others, but we're talking about Iran right now. So that's what I'm pointing to, which is that you can have different priorities. You can have a foreign policy that actually benefits your economy instead of being a drain, right? If you, those of us who are Iran watchers, we have to watch Iranian regime TV as well. And what you have seen in the last few 2 weeks, essentially, is that they have loosened up the debate rules on Iranian state-run TV. They often do that when they're facing protesters. They think they can let off some steam by bringing some critics on TV screens and have a debate and hoping that this will please people and they will go home and stop protesting. And one of the things all these debates on TV in Iran have in common is criticizing not just the foreign policy, but economic policy, the rule of on mandatory hijab and so on. They know their priorities are wrong. They know they're wrong, and yet they keep doing it. There is nothing in the Quran that says mandatory hijab by force. There are 50 plus countries in the world that are Islamic majority. Which of them actually goes out there and beats people up for the hijab? The only one I can think of is Taliban next door. But Ayatollah Khamenei doesn't want to be, a Taliban-like leader. He thinks he's better. And in reality, he shares the same kind of approach to power. It's my way or the highway. So I think, in terms of going forward, whoever runs Iran, Iran's foreign policy and regional policy has been nothing but essentially a cost and a burden on the Iranian economy at a time where the economy is on a brink, and that needs to change. So the foreign policy has to reflect much better the needs of the Iranian economy, which in turn allows for the Iranian people to actually have an ordinary life. Now, that's the economic material side. And we could talk about all the other things but I'm just giving you a sense of what this regime, what the Islamic Republic, if it stayed in power, what it needs to do differently going forward in order to prolong its own lifespan. But I mean, that's a big question mark. As Mohsen said, this doesn't look good for them. And once Ayatollah Khamenei, 83-year-old, who's been there for 33 years, is gone, the question is, will there be one other captain that can hold this thing together? Because it's a mess of a regime at this point.
Yeah, and what I find interesting about your remarks, Alex, about the Iranian people and their fatigue, if you will, with war, there's in a sense, to use the phrase from advocates in the U.S. Foreign policy debate, an endless war impulse inside of the Iranian people. And sometimes that's not reflected actually back here and understood, that Iran's regional activities, there's just the Iranian people don't like that, and they see it comes at extreme cost and doesn't realize the opportunities and potential that their country has and their people have. Briefly, Mohsen, and I know it's hard for you on this topic, I'm going to ask you because you know so much on the IRGC and you've been following it. How do you think, you mentioned already that the security agencies and others are becoming a bit more internal focused. There's debates about how they're handling this dissent from the people. What's your best guess on how these events inside of Iran might affect the IRGC in particular as one of the key arms of power projection of Iran throughout the region? What do you think happens in the next few months? And again, try to keep it brief, because I want to circle back to an important question about U.S. policy to all of you, starting with Holly after you talk, Mohsen.
But I think that let me wear my other hat, which is an activist, not an analyst. We are trying to push IRGC toward defection. And let me tell you, the intelligence of Revolutionary Guard, they have started to bug the middle range commanders of IRGC. I mean, the top generals definitely are still with Khamenei and the regime. But the middle commanders, like colonels, majors, they really worry about them. So they have started to bug them to make sure that they don't connect each other and go for, a mass action against the regime and Khamenei. So I think that if the people push more that they are doing, and especially the women-led revolution, I have to say, is happening, then IRGC will, there will be big cracks inside IRGC. As you see, they don't obey the commands to kill the people, And we have seen several scenes in the streets that instead of fighting with the people, they have told, especially the women, that please go somewhere else. For instance, in west of Tehran or in east of Tehran, that I'm from that part. Sometimes they just beg the people that please go, we don't want to fight with you. Even the members of IRGC, not only Basij or police. So I think that this is one of the three pillars of civil resistance:
Right.
protests, non-cooperation tactics, including the strikes, and defection. Defection, if it happens at the final stages in revolutionary regard, then this regime will be finished.
Great. Thank you, Mohsen. I want to turn back to you, Holly. First, I want to say congratulations to all of us, and especially the three of you. We've just had a discussion on Iran here in Washington, D.C. that has not yet mentioned in the first 50 minutes the words JCPOA, which that comment I think is very, very important, because we tried to keep the focus on the Iranian people and then the political dynamics inside of Iran. But we've had a lot of questions come in the Q&A. And for those of you joining us from other countries, you'd be perhaps deeply surprised to know that the American policy debate is solipsistic, and we like to look at ourselves and what matters. And this has been the priority. Given the protests, how do you assess, Holly, the Biden administration and then the broader U.S. ecosystem here adapting to this? Because clearly the Biden administration came into office and one of its top Middle East priorities was getting a new Iran nuclear deal. In recent conversations I've had with Biden administration officials, they're still keen on doing that, but not terribly optimistic of those prospects. Given that this administration in December of last year held a summit of democracy and has articulated democracies versus autocracies as a key theme in its own foreign policy, do you see the Biden administration in reaction to these protests adapting yet to their policies to adjust this unfolding reality inside of Iran? That's the question for you, Holly, and then we'll go to Mohsen and then Alex to wrap up, because the clock is upon us. So that's a simple question for each of you to try to answer in 2 to 3, 4 minutes. But that's where I think we'd like to end the conversation, starting with you, Holly.
Thank you, Brian. Well, to put it politely, the Biden administration's Johnny-come-lately on Iran policy. They've been sleeping on the wheel for the past few months, and I'll explain why. In May, we had some significant protests in Iran, and it took about 9 days for U.S. State Department spokesman Ned Price to even comment on them. Meanwhile, the Persian language Instagram account of the State Department was posting about CrossFit and SoulCycle in Persian. And Iranians were very angry, rightfully so. And they've since recalibrated their policies. They're finally being more outspoken in supporting these protesters' right to protest and what they're asking of their governments. And so we've seen them do that on social media. And that's been a lot more progress. I mean, and again, this won't change the realities on the ground, but it is important that the Biden administration signal these messages. So we've seen some of that. I know last week, we saw that they sanctioned the morality police, which, I mean, I imagine Alex and Mohsen can agree with me. We're shocked that it hasn't been sanctioned already after all these years. One of the key things that they also did was update this general license D2 for internet freedom. It's actually been something that internet freedom activists and researchers and myself more recently have been pushing for and for years. And they finally did this. Whether Starlink will be able to provide internet to the Iranian people, that's a separate conversation to be had. But on the topic of the JCPOA, it is now essentially, it was already a very hot button issue in Washington, but I imagine it's going to be now radioactive. But at the end of the day, preventing Iran from potentially obtaining a nuclear weapon is in U.S. national security interests. And I could see, and we've already heard from the Biden administration that that's what they intend to do. Now, whether the Islamic Republic wants to do that is another conversation. As the folks you've spoken to at the Biden administration, there's not a lot of optimism there. They've been dragging their feet on the safeguards issue, something that is the job of the International Atomic Energy Agency. And they keep asking, this is not a new demand, but they keep asking that they get guarantees that a new US president, essentially a Republican one, wouldn't withdraw from another deal. And it's something that is not deliverable, and they're not going to get it, not even on paper. And I think they've also asked in some instances for monetary compensation, which is impossible. So the ball's really in Iran's court at this point, and whether they want to actually move forward or not.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So, and what I should say also is that I see and detect in the Biden administration an effort to learn from what many see as the mistakes from the Green Revolution and the US policy responses there, and also including in other protest movements during the Trump era as well, where really not that much was done. And I think there is a shift. Mohsen, to frame my question in a different way, and since we only have a few minutes, say you're in the elevator with President Biden and you see things unfolding. What do you advise him to do about the whole mix of issues, including the JCPOA? Holly stated her analysis that it's important to try to continue to get to a deal, and it's a big question mark.
Brian, before I go to the elevator with President, I should say that imposing hijab to women of Iran has no religious base, as Alex said. And this is, as Michel Foucault says, they reproduce their power in imposing hijab to women of Iran and suppress them. Now, when I go to elevator, I will tell Mr. President that imposed hijab in Iran is Berlin Wall for this regime. And women of Iran are trying to turn down this wall. So stand in the right side of the history.
Mm-hmm.
Like President Reagan that said that turn down this wall to Gorbachev. The women of Iran, with the help of the men in Iran, are trying to turn down this wall. So stand on the right side of the history with the people of Iran for democracy, and forget about any deal with this regime. Enough is enough. Do not repeat the mistake of Obama administration.
Yeah, so that's as I understand it, a slightly different view than Holly, and that's a good thing on the deal, or it's good to have a diversity of views. Literally, Alex, we've got about a minute and a half, 2 minutes, and maybe you can give a preview of coming attractions in our joint paper. But what do you, on the question of U.S. policy, and what you would advise at this moment, given the protests and given the efforts at trying to get a nuclear deal that have not yet achieved the end goal?
Thanks, Brian. Look, I'm going to try and squeeze into the elevator with Holly and Mohsen. Very quickly, look, number one, let's be humble on the American side here. The United States doesn't do long-term strategic policy when it comes to sort of foreign affairs, as if you ask me anyway. I'm sure that's somewhat controversial, but over the last 10 years, the Obama administration negotiated a nuclear deal. Then we had Trump administration maximum pressure campaign, and now we're trying to figure out where to go. That tells you within the span of a decade, even though this Iranian nuclear issue has been with us since 2002, literally end of 2002, we haven't come up with a bipartisan American strategy on an issue that every party claims to be so important. And yet here we are, we totally disagreed in terms of what to do. And I think that is at the heart of it, the key concern. But look, I would, on the elevator back with President Biden, I would say, President Biden, Ali Khamenei is not going to change. He's 83. Everything about the man's personality, if you're a psychologist, tells you he's a micromanager, he's extremely proud and stubborn, and he's going to gamble. He's going to risk it. He's not going to cut a deal with you. Even if he cuts a deal with you, it'll be about number of centrifuges and how much oil money you unfreeze in banks in South Korea and India that Iran desperately wants to, have its hands on. But that doesn't mean you're turning a page in the US-Iran relations. The nuclear standoff is a symptom of the larger differences between the two countries, which is essentially a heart of it, rooted in the anti-American ideology of Khomeinism that was born in 1979. So President Biden doesn't have a chance to change that. But you know why? Because Khamenei doesn't want to change that. That's Khamenei's legacy. He wants to die as the anti-American hero, the leader of the Axis of Resistance. So yes, I'm trying to be between Holly and Mohsen. Do not give up on the Iranian people, because that's what your long-term strategy ought to be. This is an Iranian people that by and heart wants to live a normal life like most countries, peoples out there. That's what you want to invest in. And if you do have to, for security, national security reasons, cut a deal with Iran on the nuclear issue, do so, but don't give up everything.
Yeah.
Keep up much leverage, because leverage does matter. And again, don't forget that the Iranian people will be a very different entity to deal with for the United States once this regime either goes away or changes its ways.
Great. Well, we started with the Iranian people, and appropriately we end with it. And I want to thank Mohsen and Holly and Alex for sharing your time and expertise with us for what I thought was a very rich discussion. And I also want to thank our audience for tuning in, whether you're here live or you're watching later on online through the magic of the internet. This won't be the last time. You'll be surprised to know that the MEI will be addressing these issues. We'll have multiple forums as things unfold, similar to this, and we have, as usual, perspectives from different ranges of views coming out online on the internet at mei.edu. So thank you again. This is Brian Catoulis, Vice President of Policy at MEI. Thanks again for joining us, and thank